Yeah.
Went to Israel and London.
How was it?
How's it outside? You got hands?
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're not doing Bahar.
No, we're not going to do it. You can close the Chumash. We're going to do something timely today, not Torah today. Or Torah, but not timely. You'll see. Good morning, Rav. How are you? Everybody okay? Okay, good morning, good morning. Shabbat Shalom. Hope everybody is well today. Shabbat Shalom. Good morning. This morning, there we go. Happy Memorial Day. Yeah. Keepers. Happy Memorial Day. This morning, so first of all, if you didn't get the memo, the program that was originally scheduled for Monday has been postponed a couple weeks. We were going to dedicate the new building, but we can't do it because it's supposed to rain, which means, of course, it won't rain, but whatever. So we're going to dedicate the building on the Sunday of Shavuot, which is June 9th, 2 weeks from now. So those of you who'd like to come, please come and join us that Sunday morning, celebrate this beautiful, beautiful new building, the Levine Community Center. Come on in. And we'd be glad to have everybody come and join. This morning, following our Torah study, very special service on Memorial Day. We've done this now for some years. We welcome veterans from across the community to come and join us. And we'll have some hundreds of veterans here, Jewish and non-Jewish, for a celebration of their service to the countries that they love, to America, Canada, Israel, and elsewhere. We'll have three speakers this morning speaking about sacrifice and heroism. There's a young man whose father was in the Bataan Death March, one of the cruelest incidents of the Second World War in the Philippines. And he's going to he's writing a book and made a movie about his father's experience. He'll be speaking about that. We have a woman who's a Gold Star mom who lost a son in Afghanistan. She herself is a veteran as well. She'll be speaking about her experiences. And we have a gentleman who's won the French Chevalier Medal. And we'll have about 20 people who have won that medal who are recognized by the French people as liberators of their land, as well as it's Mrs. Wenger's birthday. Happy birthday, Rita. So we'll celebrate with the Wengers as well. So, hi, welcome. So this morning, following our Torah study, come join us in the sanctuary. We're going to daven through the service, read through the Torah and Haftarah. I think, Abby, you have the Haftarah, right? Good. You can hear Abby read a beautiful Haftarah beautifully. And then join us for a celebration of vets. And then following that, there's lunch. And after that, Harvey Keenan, our dear friend, is going to be leading a conversation with the vets, a panel discussion in the other room as part of a Shabbat Shiur. So join us for that. All these things are quite wonderful. Next week we will tefillah as usual, and then in the morning following our we'll have Torah study, Shabbos, and then following that, our people from the Jewish World Watch will be coming to talk about their latest efforts in identifying and stopping genocide across the world. That'll be the Shabbat Shiur for next week. And what else is going on? Lots of other things going on, but you'll see that. This morning I'm going to take the liberty of asking you to close the Chumash because there are now 3 states that have passed very restrictive laws about abortion, and several more are on the docket, will be passed, and the whole issue will come to the Supreme Court very soon. And about a dozen people approached me this week and said, what does Jewish law say about this? So I thought this would be something we ought to take a moment and learn. For a number of reasons. One is because it's one of the most remarkable, it's just stepping back from the issue itself. As a case study in how Jewish law works, it's one of the most vivid case studies of how you can trace the development of Jewish legal thinking on a very, very critical issue. And you'll see that Jewish law, at the end, you'll see that a Jewish law does not allow us to look at this issue in any kind of simplistic lens. It's fine to raise your fist and scream pro-life. It's fine to raise your fist and scream pro-choice. It's more complicated than that. It's a very complicated issue. It's a very fraught issue. And Jewish law tries to capture that. So this morning what we're going to do is trace the development of the issue of abortion through Jewish law. I'm going to present you with the precedents that would be in front of any Beit Din, any panel of rabbis, and we'll see how rabbis across the generations have addressed this kind of issue, okay? We're not going to have time to do every single one, but you'll have a lot, and I gave you an awful lot of sources there. And those you're watching on TV, we're going to post the sources. If they're not up now, they'll be up later. I'll read them so you can hear them all, okay? There are two or three caveats before we begin. I started this page of sources with a testimony from a woman. This testimony comes from an article published in the Forward, the English language Forward, last year, from an Orthodox woman who talks about her own experience. And I started with that because, number one, all of the decisors of Jewish law are male. And this is a woman that has this is an issue that has a lot to do with women. And unfortunately, there are no women voices in the development of halakha until our time. Nina was the first woman rabbi to be accepted to JTS. So my wife, Nina, who's out walking the dog and will be here shortly, is the first halachically ordained rabbi. In the Reform movement, you have some writing about this, but it's not about halakha, it's about ethics. So you'll see, I quoted some wonderful Reform teaching at the end. So, I mean, there's no women's voices in the development of the halakha until contemporary times. And that's unfortunate. So I think we have to start with a woman's voice. And at least try to keep that in mind as we read all of these men talking about this issue. Okay, that's number one. Number two, law is a generality. It doesn't deal with specifics. A judge has to make the decision, how do I take the principles, the precedents, the law, the statutes, and apply it to a particular case? When you have a case, when you have questions as fraught as this one, fraught meaning as deeply emotional, as deeply personal, as deeply painful, it's a very hard thing to do. You'll see that at the end of this testimony, this woman says, halacha is compassionate, and we should be too. The question of how to be compassionate about where does compassion fall, is a very, very, very painful, difficult issue. And to deal with the difference between legal statutes, which are general, and a particular family sitting in front of you, which is very particular, is a very, very hard thing to do. And you'll see that in the course of the conversation as we get into the sources that we... But I never want you, as we read these sources, I just keep remembering these are real people dealing with really difficult, painful, emotional issues, personal issues, issues of life and death, issues of motherhood and identity, issues of God's presence in the world. It's a very, very painful issue. Certainly has been in my career as a rabbi, and I haven't done this very much, but the few times I've been asked to counsel people who were considering abortions or coming out of abortions. Very, 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 very painful. Emotionally painful, morally painful, difficult, asking for help. So let's take a look at some of the cases together, some of the precedents, and then I want to imagine that you're on a Beit Din and you're looking at these precedents and you have to make a decision, okay? The principal precedent comes from Mishpatim, from the book of Exodus, okay? Which we read about 6-8 weeks ago. It's from the 21st chapter of Exodus. Here's the case presented in the Torah. When men fight, now, two guys get into a shoving match in the market, okay? And one of them pushes a pregnant woman. So two fellas are fighting over a pineapple at Ralph's. And one of them shoves the other, and the guy stumbles and knocks over a woman who is pregnant, okay? And a miscarriage results. But no other harm follows. That's the language of the Torah, okay? The one responsible, which is interesting, which one is that, right? Shall be fined according as the woman's husband may exact from him, the payment being based on reckoning. But if other harm follows, the penalty shall be life for life. No. And it goes on, life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. So the question is, that's very obscure. I mean, first of all, what do you mean no other harm follows? What does that mean? And second of all, which one's responsible? The guy who shoved or the guy who got shoved? That's a very strange law, okay? So now we look into the Midrash. In the oldest rabbinic Midrash on the book of Exodus is the Mechilta de Rishon. It's a 3rd century, 4th century Midrash. And when they read other harm, means the death of the woman. So now if I read that back into the case, right? Two men are fighting. One of them pushes a pregnant woman. A miscarriage results, but the woman survives. She survives. The one responsible shall be fined. It's nezek. It's not murder. It's a civil penalty. He owes money to the family as if he injured them, but he's not counted as a murderer. Or manslaughter. He's not counted as a capital case. He hasn't taken a life. Except if the woman dies, right? If the woman dies, then it is a capital case. Then he's tried for manslaughter. So according to the Mechilta's reading, you have a distinction here between the woman's life and the fetus's life. The destruction of the fetus is not considered manslaughter. It's not a capital case. You haven't taken a life. But the death of the woman would be considered manslaughter. You have taken a life. Everybody see that? You see how that? No? But that's what it says.
I understand, but that's not what it means.
Really? Go ahead, Dave.
It was precisely an accident.
No, it is an act.
It didn't mean
No.
harm the woman or the baby.
Absolutely. So now, we can limit this precedent if you want, or we can expand this precedent, okay? In law, you can limit a precedent or expand a precedent. You understand? I can use this case to learn other cases, or I can say there are facts about this case which make it unique. One of the facts about this case, which is, this was an accident. No one intended to take the life of that fetus. No one intended to do anything to that woman, right? Okay, so in that case, this is the reckoning. This is how it works out. Or we can expand the precedent and say, even if it's an accident, it's clear that the Torah draws a distinction between her life and the baby's life. The death of the fetus or the baby is not considered the same as the death of the woman, because the penalty is different. The death of the fetus is a civil matter. You owe the family compensation for their medical expenses. It's like an injury. It's like any other injury to the woman's body. But the death of the woman is a capital case. That's taking a life. Okay? And you could read it either way. And incidentally, the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Bible, which became the basis of the New Testament, reads this somewhat differently. Okay? Another precedent which is more fuzzy is in the same chapter just before, he that strikes a man so that he dies, he shall be surely put to death. Okay, so the clear life for life, right? And then Mechilta jumps in and Rashi brings it down and says, but that's the death of a man, not the death of a fetus. Okay? Now you have a tradition here which reveres life, which sees life as a great gift of God, as a precious gift of God. The question is, how do you protect whose life, which life, what's life, when does life begin? All of these kinds of questions now begin. Now, the next source, before you read it, and this is a trigger warning. This is a very difficult source to read, very painful. Okay? So I want you to be aware of that. But it's not an unusual case when you remember that in pre-modern medicine, babies were born at home with midwives, right? You don't have fetal monitors. You don't have anti-hemorrhaging drugs. You don't have all of the accoutrements that make childbirth today, thank God, a sort of routine thing. And even today, it's not entirely routine. There's still an incident of infant mortality in our culture. But at pre-modern medicine, which didn't have any of the tools that we have, pre-modern medicine, a midwife would go to deliver a woman, and the midwife might be faced with a case in the course of delivering the baby where that midwife has to make a split-second decision. Do I save the mother? Do I save the baby? I can't save them both. If the baby's born, the mother will die. You can imagine a case where a baby's breech, and she's hemorrhaging, and the only way to stop the hemorrhaging is to stop the birth. Now, you don't have, today we have drugs and we have C-sections and all kinds of, you don't have the opportunity to do that in pre-modern medicine. That nurse, that midwife, that doula has to know, what do I do? So the rabbis give her a clear instruction. And I apologize for the next section. It's very brutal, and I apologize for it. But I think you need to hear what they have to say. A woman is having difficulty giving birth. It is permitted to cut up the child inside her womb and take it out limb by limb because her life takes precedence. So if you have to make that horrible, horrible split-second decision, whose life takes precedence? Whose life takes precedence? The mother's. Okay? However, always a however in Jewish law, if the greater part of the child has come out, it must not be touched because one life cannot be taken to save another. So if the kid's already halfway out, that kid's a kid. And if mom dies in childbirth, she dies in childbirth, you can't affect the mother. Now the Tosefta, which is the parallel source in rabbinic tradition, gives us a slightly different reading, where it says the greater part of the child. The Tosefta says if its head has come out. And you can see the difference between the two sources. I'm not a doctor, and I apologize if I get this wrong, but the difference between the two sources is if it's a breech birth or if it's a more regular birth. In a breech birth, the tuchus comes out first, and if it's otherwise, the head comes out. You see? Now the question is, how much of the kid comes out before the midwife is instructed to let it proceed? How far along in the birth process do you have to go? Here too, there seems to be, and again, David's caveat is exactly right. We have to be very careful to know how far we can extend precedence. In this case, there is a clear, direct threat to the life of the mother. You're permitted to abort even in the process of birth, which in abortion thinking would be the worst case scenario. Because we talk about first trimester, second trimester, third trimester, the worst case scenario would be during the birth, right? Because that's as developed as the fetus is going to be, as the baby's going to be. Even in that case, to save the life of a mother from a direct threat, you're allowed to take the baby and save the mother. The mother's life takes precedence, except when the kid has come out, halfway out, that's when human life. So the notion being that the fetus's life begins at conception, or more, earlier, if you believe in souls. But human life, with all the attendant legal rights, begins when half of you has come out of mom. Right? That's where we are right now. That's the Mishnah. Now, what's going to happen next is that we're going to have two branches of Jewish law as they interpret this Mishnah and other precedents that the Talmud mentions. There is no direct question of, do you have a right to abort in first trimester in the Talmud? But you have other hints, okay? Other hints about things that the Talmud believed in. Okay? If you go to the bottom of the page, here are two other hints, okay? The first case, Rav Chisda ruled, is a case of impurity about how long a woman's in nida, right? Rav Chisda ruled that an embryo is considered maya da alma, mere water, until the 40th day of pregnancy, which is roughly first trimester. So it's not considered even a life. Rav Chisda rules that it's not considered even a life in first trimester. Okay? So that's one ruling. The second ruling has to do, the second ruling in Mishnah Nida has to do with a woman who is a Kohen, a Bat Kohen. And in certain cases, she's allowed to participate in the family's eating of truma, eating of sacrifice meat. So they have to decide under what cases. If she miscarries on the 40th day, she need not be concerned that it was a fetus. If she miscarries on the 41st day, she should sit for a male and female being in nida. So the question is, in both cases, the 40th day, or what we would call first trimester, is considered a cutoff point. And the Talmud then introduces an idea, which you'll see later in Jewish law, as we learn more anatomy, which is that the fetus is in different stages of development, and the situation is different depending on how far along the pregnancy was. This is another precedent that the Talmud introduces, only in a backhanded way. It's not a direct discussion of abortion, but in a backhanded way. Now, we're going to construct the two lines of tradition, okay? Start with Rashi. Right, Rashi, 11th century French commentator on the Talmud. Okay? What does he say? This is a commentary, right here on the first page. You don't have to turn a page. Right here, right? This is a commentary on, right, or this, let's go back to, let's step back a second. Talmud Sanhedrin is a commentary on Ohalot, right? So we know that once the child's heads come out, or once the child's bodies come out, you can't touch it. So the Talmud asks the question, under what logic are you allowed to destroy this fetus? And under what logic must you save it once the heads come out? What's the logic of the Mishnah? This is a classic Talmudic question. The Mishnah is compiled in 200 CE, okay? And the Talmud spends the next 300 years asking, what was the logic of the Mishnah? So given our Mishnah, what's the logic? And here's the answer. Once the child's heads come forth, it may not be harmed, because one life may not be taken to save another. That's a quotation from the Mishnah, or from the Tosefta, actually. Okay? Now they're trying to find, what's the logic? What's the logic? Why can you kill the baby in the mother, but halfway out you can't? 10 minutes later it becomes a person. What's the logic? And they propose a logic. And the logic is the rodef. Why is this so? Is he not a pursuer with intent to kill? Okay, stop a second. The law of the rodef. You are sitting calmly in the park, and a person runs by going, help me, help me, help me. He's going to kill me, he's going to kill me, he's going to kill me. Okay? And you happen to be sitting there cleaning your shotgun. Could happen. And another guy runs by saying, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to kill you, and he is carrying a lethal weapon. Okay? You are not permitted to sit there and watch what happens next. You must intervene. And according to the Talmudic tradition, if the only way to save the life of the victim is to take the life of the pursuer, you're permitted to do that. Not the first way, not the most convenient way, but the only way. If you determine that there's no other way to stop this guy from killing this other guy, you are permitted in Jewish law to blow his head off. Please don't go home and say the rabbi said it's okay to blow people's head off. Only in that very narrow case where there is no other way to prevent a homicide are you permitted to stop it by using lethal force. There's a big argument this week of the LAPD. They just changed the laws of legal force. You are permitted to use legal force to stop a homicide because the guy with the weapon who is affirming out loud that it is his intention to kill the other fellow, and those are the conditions, he's considered a rodef, and the only way to stop him is using lethal force. You're permitted to use lethal force. So the Talmud asks the following question. Perhaps the logic of the Mishnah, everybody following this? If you're not following it, I'll go over it. Perhaps the logic of the Mishnah is that the fetus can be put into the category of a rodef, trying to kill the mother. And if the fetus is intending to kill the mother, you can kill a killer before they kill. Yes, now, you can begin to see, wait a minute, you say. Wait a minute. That's not what's going on here. The rodef, the pursuer, rodef means pursuer, has to have verbally stated clearly his or her intention to kill the victim, okay? And this fetus hasn't said, I'm out to get mom. Not till they're a teenager. So the Talmud comes back, and the Stam in the Talmud, which is the Talmudic editor, says, I disagree with that logic because the rodef in this case, because the baby in this case, has not stated an intention to kill the mother. No baby wants to kill its mother. This is simply a bad circumstance. And the language they use is, there is a distinction between the rodef and this baby. She is pursued by heaven, which means it's not the baby's fault this came down. It's not the baby's intent to kill the mother. This is bad. This is a bad anatomy. This is bad stuff. But this is God's fault. This is not the baby's fault. So the Talmud, the stam of the Talmud, stam means the editor of the Talmud, seems to reject the language and logic of the rodef. Okay? It rejects the language and logic of rodef, and so it falls back on a different language and logic, which is that the baby isn't considered fully human. And therefore, if you have to choose between a fully human life and a less than fully human life, you choose the fully human life. Okay? That's what Rashi is going to bring down when he comments on the Talmud in Sanhedrin. The Rashi on that line in Sanhedrin says, as long as the child did not come into the world, it is not called a living being, and therefore it is permissible to take its life in order to save the life of its mother. But once the head has come out, the child may not be harmed because it's considered fully born, and one life may not be taken to save another. Everybody following this? So once again, just to recap, because I'll make sure everybody follows this. You have a Mishnah in Ohalot, which says, if a midwife is standing there and the birth of the baby is killing the mother, you can abort even during the birth process to save the life of the mother, until the point in which more than half of the kid, or in the other version, the head of the child has emerged, in which case you have to let nature take its course, because that's a fully human being. Then the Talmud says, well, wait a minute, what's the logic that allows you to kill a baby in process of being birthed? Maybe it's rodef. Rodef means the pursuer. Maybe it's pursuer. And they discuss this, and the stam, the Gemara's stam, the editor of the Talmud says, no, the baby has no intent to kill the mother, therefore it cannot be considered a rodef. The real logic is that the baby's not a fully born human being, and therefore you can take a less than human to save the life of a fully human. And that's what Rashi brings down. And that's what Rashi brings down. However, you ready for this? This is why you need thumbs to study Gemara. However, Rashi isn't everybody. Turn the page. Rashi isn't everybody. And you see where it says Maimonides? The third source down on the second page, it says Maimonides. So here's the Rambam. The Rambam lives 100 years after Rashi, and the Rambam is codifying law in his Mishnah Torah, and this is the law he codifies. This is a negative commandment. We have no pity on the life of a pursuer. Okay? If you really have no other way to stop a murder, blow his head off, don't worry about it. You have, because life right? Consequently, Rambam says, the sages have ruled that if a woman with child is having difficulty in giving birth, the child inside her may be taken out either by drugs or by surgery, because it is regarded as one pursuing her and trying to kill her. But once its head has appeared, it must not be touched, for we may not set aside one human life to save another. Okay, so what happened here? What happened here was the Talmud proposed a logic to understand the Mishnah, the logic of the rodef. And it appears to me and to Rashi that the Talmud rejected that logic and stood by another logic. However, the Rambam likes that logic. So the Rambam considers abortion a case in which the fetus is trying to kill the mother, which would mean that, according to Maimonides, you are permitted to have an abortion, but only in one case. What's that? Where there is a direct and immediate threat to the life of the mother. In any other case, it would not be acceptable. Rashi, however, uses a different logic. He says the logic of the Talmud is not rodef. That was rejected by the Talmud because this baby has not expressed an intent to kill its mother. The reason why the Talmud ruled the way it did was because the baby's not considered fully human until it's born. In which case, one could imagine that there might be many cases in which one would allow an abortion, knowing that the fetus is precious, but because it's not fully human, then you can begin to ask, well, what other cases besides the direct and immediate threat to the life of the mother might one permit an abortion? Everybody see the difference between Rashi and the Rambam? This sounds like an Orthodox shul. I'm so proud of us because now you can all go home and say, oh, what did you study in Torah Study? Well, with the Rashi and the Rambam, right? And you're going to sound so frum. Would somebody do me a favor? If you see a friend who went to Chabad this morning, ask them if they know the difference between Rashi and Rambam on this sugya. In that language, right? In that language, right? Because you'll see, they'll say, oh, your rabbi is very, very frum. All right, that's enough. I'm giving a little humor because this is such, the reason I'm making humor is because it's such a painful thing to talk about. It's a horribly painful thing. I don't mean to make fun of it in any way. It's really hard to read this stuff, okay? Now, back up with me. Back up with me. I'll be right. I know you have a lot of questions, and I'm going to get them all. Back up with me to two sources that I gave you here, which give you not legal background, but other background, okay? Tosfot. Tosafot are scholars who were literally the grandchildren of Rashi. Rashi had 5 daughters. They were all very learned. In our generation, they'd all be rabbis. In that generation, they were all wives of rabbis. Their husbands and their grandchildren, his grandchildren, kept the school alive after he died, and their opinions are always printed on the opposite side of the page from Rashi. And like any petulant kids, they always talk about why dad was wrong. Okay, so you read Rashi, now comes Tosfos, and Tosfos says, although feticide is forbidden, except where the mother's life is in danger, there's no punishment for this act. Because feticide does not occasion capital punishment, the fetus is sufficiently human to render its destruction a moral offense. So what does Tosfos do? Come in, you can come in. We got plenty of room. Everybody shove over and make room for Jews. Come on. You're not going to like what we're talking about. That's the only problem. Come on in. What Tosfos does here is quite remarkable. They find a middle ground between Rashi and Rambam. You see the middle ground that they stake out? They stake out a middle ground between Rashi and Rambam, right? They say, we agree with Rashi, with Grandpa, right? We agree with Grandpa that the fetus is not a fully human life, not a rodef, right? But we agree with the Rambam that you shouldn't go around killing. So here's the case. If there were a case in which a woman aborted a fetus and it wasn't a direct threat to her life, we would consider that a sin, but we wouldn't impose capital punishment. Because we agree with Grandpa that the baby's not a person yet, but nevertheless, you shouldn't be doing it. But if you did it, b'di'eved, if you did it, and you got arrested in Alabama, if you get arrested, you go to jail for 99 years. The Tosfos are saying, you can arrest the guy, you could shame him, you could take away his medical license, but it's not capital punishment. So they're trying to find a middle ground. The Zohar tries to ask the question, what is a fetus? Right? There are 3 persons who drive away the Shekhinah from the world, making it impossible for the Holy One, blessed be, to fix his abode in the universe and causing prayer to be unanswered. That's pretty strong language. And they give you 1, 2, and 3. The third is one who causes fetus to be destroyed in the womb, for he destroys the artifice of the Holy One and his workmanship. For these abominations, the Spirit of holiness weeps. So there's a basic attitude that the fetus is utterly, infinitely precious. But there might be cases in which you would allow an abortion. And now, on the basis of these 2 great thinkers, Rashi and Rambam, you build 2 edifices. An edifice based on the Rambam prohibits abortion in all cases except where the life of the mother is directly affected. And the edifice built on the Rashi says there are ways of constructing, there are circumstances in which we would allow an abortion. And that's the debate. And that debate comes all the way down, and you'll see in a minute, all the way down to the 20th century, 21st century in Jewish law. Okay? That's the debate that comes down. So if somebody says to you, oh no, Jewish law prohibits abortions except for the case where the mother's life is directly threatened, you can say, yes, that's Rambam. Rashi thinks otherwise. And if somebody says, no, Jewish law believes in pro-choice, a woman can have an abortion anytime, no, that's not even Rashi. Rashi still maintains that this is a very, 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 very serious matter, but he has opened the door for certain cases, and you'll see what they are in a moment. Are we good? You see how complicated this is? Okay? Okay. Well, hang on. So we got some, you have the microphone? All right, so people wanted to ask some questions a moment ago, and I successfully stifled all of you. All right, so let me get a couple of questions. Then we're going to look at some of the case law. That's coming next. So if you'll hang on, I promise you, you're going to hear some other opinions.
Although Rashi and Rambam may disagree with the reasoning,
Right.
they both agree, and I think the Tosafot did also,
Yeah.
that the only reason to justify taking the life of the fetus is to save the life of the mother.
No, Rashi would allow other kinds. You'll see this in a minute. You'll see this in case law, where Rashi would, because if the fetus is not considered a full life, there may be other circumstances. Then your question is, okay, if it's not a fully human life, what is it? What is its status? How must it be guarded? So you'll see in a moment, as we get into the case law, other cases that are going to be built on Rashi, where they're going to say, if it's not fully human, and then if it's in earlier stages of pregnancy, there are other cases in which we can. Go ahead.
But the reference you gave us
Yeah.
still says, although it's not a fully formed,
Yeah.
that it is in order to save the mother's life.
Right, right.
So all I was saying is
Yeah.
both of them say it's in order to save the mother's life.
Yeah, but now
that
the
they
question is going to
justify.
be, what do you mean by that?
Okay.
Okay, you'll see. What about, I mean, you can think of lots of cases where saving the mother's life might not be what you immediately says. Watch how the case law develops, and you'll see this. And frankly, you can turn it the other way, because if you read Rambam carefully, you can see that he adopts Rashi at the end. Right? Once its head appear, it must not be touched, for we must not set one life against the. I mean, so he's also playing both sides of the street. Yes, please.
I'm a bit confused.
I'm sorry. I'm trying really hard.
about the difference, really, between Rashi and Rambam.
Okay, watch.
They are arguing
Okay, watch.
about the reasoning, but
Good.
the end result is the same.
No, it's
No?
not. Watch. Look at the next cases. The most important one on the second page is the one that says Rabbi Yaakov Emden. Everybody see that? Rav Emden, huge Central European rabbi of the 17th century. Even in the case of a legitimate fetus, there is reason to be lenient if there is great need. The other translation of the phrase is grave necessity. So long as labor has not begun, or as long as the child has not begun to move, even if the mother's life is not in jeopardy, but only so far as to save her from an evil associated with it that would cause great pain. So the question, Rabbi Yaakov Emden says, based on Rashi, who says that this is not a fully human life, if there were cases of grave necessity, I would permit an abortion. So now, watch what happens. Look, go up one source. These are is tshuvot. What is a tshuva? Somebody wrote a letter to a rabbi. Here is a rabbi, a local rabbi, right? A family comes to see Feinstein. Feinstein doesn't know exactly what to do. So I email my rabbi, and I say, here's the case. Tell me what to do. And the tshuva gets written back. Now, in this case, it's kind of moot, because by the time the mail got back and forth, the kid's had his bar mitzvah, right? But these tshuvot get written because they become legal precedent. This is case law. She'elot u'tshuvot, questions and answers, are case law. And we have books and books and books and books and books and books and books of these. At Bar Ilan University in Israel, they've computerized them now for the first time. And there's a huge database where you can punch in, for example, abortion first trimester, and get a readout of all of the case law that was decided from the 1st century till the 21st century in these areas, right? So I gave you a small selection of the case law just to show you some of the cases that rabbis had to deal with, okay? Rav Yair Chaim Bach of the 17th, 18th century, a married woman committed adultery and became pregnant. Yes, this happens in the Jewish world too. She then had pangs of remorse and wanted to do penance and asked whether she could swallow a drug in order to get rid of the evil fruit in her womb. Rav Bachrach makes it clear immediately that the question of the permissibility of abortion has nothing to do with the legitimacy of the child. I mean, where the kid came from is irrelevant, right? The only question is whether abortion is considered taking a life or not. Is that Rashi or Rambam? Well, watch. He distinguishes various stages in the development of the fetus. He's the first one to do that. We saw that in the Talmud in the first 40 days. He's going to talk about trimesters of pregnancy. 40 days after conception, 3 months after conception. Rav Bacharach then concludes that, now watch the word, theoretically, abortion might be permitted during the early stages of pregnancy because Rav Chisda told us it's just water. But we do not do so because of the custom adopted by both Jewish and general communities. So notice how he qualifies his opinion, right? He first of all, he says, the answer is, if this is in the first 40 days of pregnancy, yes, you can have the abortion. But, he says, I'm not making that decision. Number one, that's theoretical, not practical. I don't want to sign off on this act because I'm not comfortable with it. Number two, it's against our custom, and custom counts as law. But theoretically, it would be available, okay? Rav Eliezer Deutsch in the 19th century, a woman had become pregnant a few weeks, began to spit blood. Any of the doctors can tell me why that is. Expert physicians said she must drink a drug in order to bring about a miscarriage. Should she wait, it be necessary to remove the fetus by surgery, endangering the life of the mother. Is it permissible to induce miscarriage by means of a drug? Rav Deutsch answers that such a case, it is certainly permissible to do so. He concludes that abortion is permitted in this case for 3 reasons. 1, until 3 months after conception, it's not a fetus. It's just water. 2, no overt act is involved in this abortion. You're not going in and touching the baby, you're taking a drug. The body is going to miscarry it, right? And 3, the woman herself is doing it, as opposed to a doctor or a surgeon or anyone else, and therefore it's an act of self-preservation which you're allowed to do. Everybody go, That's really complicated. The first reason it's complicated is anytime a rabbi gives you 3 reasons instead of 1, it means what? He's not sure. I mean, if he was really sure, he'd say yes. But he's not. He's not sure. So he's playing with this, and he's trying to find logics. And while you wonder why not one of them was enough, why he needed 3. I mean, it's an interesting case, right? Okay. Rav Ben Sion Uziel, Sephardic chief rabbi, dealt with a case concerning a woman threatened with deafness if she went through a pregnancy. He decided that since the fetus is not an independent life but only the part of the mother, it's not a sin to destroy it for the sake of the mother. So when you say save the life or save the well-being of the mother, he would consider deafness a reason to do it. Right? Rev Isaac Meir Mizrahi in the 20th century, 1913, mental health risk has been definitely equated to physical health risk. These are his words. This woman who is in danger of losing her mental health unless pregnancy is interrupted would therefore accordingly qualify. Right? So if you could positively say that this would seriously affect the mental well-being of this mother. So let's say a child, a 14, 15-year-old, gets pregnant, and you say this kid's never going to be the same. It's going to destroy this kid's well-being. Rev Uziel would say, or Rev Mizrahi would say it's permitted. Okay? It didn't say. I didn't read the whole tshuva. I just found this as an excerpt. You can find the tshuva. So that's the edifice built upon Rashi. Everybody see that? The edifice built upon Rashi says, look, at least in the first trimester, we can all agree that this is not a life. This is mere water, or this is not a fully human life. You can't just have an abortion because you feel like it. Notice they're all reasons. They're all very serious threats to the well-being of the mother. But for grave necessity, as Rakov Emden stated, for serious risk, you're permitted to abort during the first trimester at least, and maybe following that if there really is grave necessity. Now, let's switch and look at the edifice built upon the Rambam. Okay, you ready? Unterman, who was the chief rabbi of Israel, and it's ironic that the Ashkenazim are going to go to Rambam and the Sephardim are going to go to Rashi. There's a crisscross here, because Rashi is Ashkenazic and the Rambam is Sephardic. I've often told you that if you ever have a halachic question and you want the answer to be no, come to an Ashkenazic rabbi. And if you want the answer to be yes, come to a Sephardic rabbi, right? Rav Unterman dealt with the question of an expectant mother who contracted rubella and feared the child might be born with serious mental and physical abnormalities. Rav Moshe Yonah Zweig dealt with a case of deformities caused by thalidomide. Remember that horrible drug, right? Permission to abort was denied by both of these guys. Why? Both these are unalterably opposed to any abortion, except in a case like that mentioned in the Mishnah, where there's a direct threat to the life of the mother. Moreover, both argue that there's no distinction in the eyes of the law between normal and abnormal persons with regard to the statutes governing homicide or with regard to those governing feticide. Do you see what they're saying here? So there's two logics. Logic one is they're strict constructionists. The Mishnah says very clearly only when the life of the mother is directly and immediately threatened, otherwise you can't touch the baby. Number two, if you made a distinction between, let's say, a healthy fetus and an unhealthy fetus, why couldn't you make that same distinction among people? If you can kill an unhealthy fetus, can you kill an unhealthy person? And the rabbis say, just as you can't kill an unhealthy person, you can't kill an unhealthy fetus. That's their logic. That's built upon the Rambam. Did everybody see that? Okay? Yes. Douglas.
Where you say Rambam is only a direct threat to the health of the mother.
Yeah.
Couldn't you apply Mizrahi and say mental health is a direct threat to the life of the mother and create an opening just as broad under Rambam as you can under Rashi?
No.
Why?
Because health and life are different.
Mental health is a threat.
Yeah.
A threat to the mental health, a direct threat.
Hell, that's well-being. That's not direct. The Mishnah is very clear that the mother's going to die in the process of childbirth. That's what they mean. That's the strict construction of it. You're a good lawyer, Douglas. I appreciate that. You'd fit right in with these guys, right?
The other thing, I'm seeing this just like what you're seeing in law school.
Right, I know.
You get tremendously confused.
Right.
And you get all these arguments on the one hand, on the other hand.
Yes.
And then you run out of hands. And they're there are layers upon layers, and
Right.
It becomes tremendously confusing.
So the first thing I wanted you to say, remember what I said at the very beginning?
Yeah.
I want you to appreciate the complexity of this.
Okay.
This is not something that you wave a sign that says pro-life, pro-choice, and you've settled it. They're really complex and emotionally fraught and deeply, deeply personal issues. And the rabbis are trying to arrive trying to arrive at decisions that are faithful to the tradition, but respond to the cases that are sitting in front of them.
Doesn't seem like the chief rabbi did that.
You disagree with him, that's fine, I get it, but he's trying to. Now here's the machloket in contemporary times. Turn to the third page. Everybody okay so far? Yes. I got lots of questions, so I'll answer lots of questions. So this machloket is between two very contemporary 20th century rabbis. One is Moshe Feinstein, who we think is a distant relative, but we think we were the branch of the family that went awry. Right? I don't know how many of you remember there was a Rav here in the valley who was teaching at the high school named Aaron Tendler. Remember him? Very wonderful young man. That's Moshe Feinstein's grandson. So Moshe Feinstein's son-in-law is Moshe Tendler, who's a professor of...
Who appointed me chairman after him.
Right. Moshe Tendler he's the professor of biology at Yeshiva University and one of the chief authorities on medical ethics in the Orthodox community and a great scholar, right? So Moshe Feinstein is considered by many to be the most important halachic decider of the 20th century. Okay? Lower East Side yeshiva called Tifereth Yerushalayim, terrific place. Eliezer Waldenberg, no lightweight, head of the Beit Din of Jerusalem, two guys with long beards, big black coats, big fuzzy hats. Very, 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 and they had a machloket. They duked it out in public over this very issue. Okay? So here are the two opinions of Rabbi Eliezer Waldenberg, Rosh Beit Din of Yerushalayim, and Rav Moshe Feinstein, Rosh Beit Din of Tiferet Yerushalayim, right? Here's Waldenberg. If there is a danger to the mother from continuing the pregnancy, one should permit abortion without hesitation. Who's he building on? Rashi and Yaakov Emden, okay? Also, if her health is poor and to cure her or to relieve her from great pain, it is necessary to abort the fetus. And notice what he's saying. He adds something which we didn't see before. He says it's not just permitted to have an abortion, it's obligatory to have an abortion, which is like, whoa. Even if she's not in actual danger, there is room to permit it based on halachic authorities' evaluation of the situation. In the case of the case that presented to both rabbis was a case of a baby where it was determined that the mother was a Tay-Sachs carrier and the baby had Tay-Sachs. So the baby would be deformed in birth, live a painful, horrible life, and die very young. That was the case that was presented to both rabbis. Eliezer Waldenberg says, abort. You'll save the mother untold misery. In the case of a baby who will have Tay-Sachs, and I quoted it so you'll hear it, one should permit abortion as soon as it becomes evident without doubt from the test that indeed such a baby will be born, if indeed we permit an abortion according to halacha, because there is great need and because of pain and suffering. That's Yaakov Emden. He's quoting Yaakov Emden. It seems this is the classic case for such permission. It is irrelevant in what way the pain and suffering is expressed, whether it's physical or psychological. Indeed, psychological suffering is in many ways greater than the suffering of the flesh. So here you have a Rav who says, I'm looking out for the mother, and especially in early stages of pregnancy, if you had a baby and you knew that the fetus was horribly deformed and you knew this would cause both psychological and physical harm to the mother, you abort. Okay? Here's Rav Moshe Feinstein, also no lightweight, right? Same case. Same case. It is forbidden to kill it, even to save someone's life. The exception would be to save the life of the mother during childbirth, not for any other need of the mother, which would definitely be forbidden. Okay? Even for children for whom the doctor predicts a very short lifespan, such as those children who are born with a disease called Tay-Sachs, which, though newly developed tests can diagnose prenatally, it would be forbidden since there's no danger to the mother and the infant is not a rodif. One cannot permit an abortion even though there's a great suffering involved. It is incontrovertible and clear, as I have written, a straightforward halacha according to the words of our masters, the traditional commentaries, halachic authorities, that abortion will be forbidden as a bona fide murder for any fetus, legitimate or mamzer, genetically normal or afflicted with Tay-Sachs, are all included in the prohibition according to Jewish law. These are the two Gedolim. You see the two Gedolim, what's going on here? And you can see what they're fighting for. For a moment, look at what they're fighting for, right? Waldenberg is fighting because he's going to protect the mother and the well-being of the mother, and Rav Feinstein is fighting to protect the sanctity of life. And they're both fighting on principle, right? And they're both sure they're right. Really, really sure they're right. Now, the tshuva, you should know, is 20 pages long. This is a paragraph taken from 20 very, 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 very heavily footnoted pages. Anybody ever read academic articles? You get 2 lines and 28 footnotes. So they're quoting guys, some of them that I gave you here and many, many others. And then there's a fight over what the quotations mean. In order to arrive at his opinion, Rav Feinstein had to take a quotation from a certain medieval rabbi and change it. And Rav Waldenberg says, how can you change the quote? The quote says opposite of what you said it says. And Feinstein says, no, that's what he meant. I mean, it's really like a Pesach argument. But you can see, so here's David Feldman is a conservative rabbi who writes, this is a very good book, by the way, if you want to read, it's got a bigger title, Birth Control, Abortion, I think it's Jewish Law. He says, what generalizations can be made about rabbinic attitude toward abortion? It can best be described as bifurcating in two directions, what I told you, both of which presuppose the fetus is not a person, yet one approach builds down and the other builds up. The first can be identified especially with Untermann, who sees an abortion as akin to homicide, and therefore permissible only in cases of corresponding gravity, such as saving the life of the mother. It then builds down from this strict position to embrace a broader interpretation of life-saving situations, which include threat to health, for example, as well as threat to life. The other, which is Uziel, assumes no real prohibition against abortion at any time, and except perhaps during the life of advanced stages of pregnancy, and builds up from this lenient position to safeguard against indiscriminate abortions. So you can start out with Moshe Feinstein's hard-ass, strict constructionist, and still find some leniency. Who asked me about where you can say well-being of the mother comes to saving her life, yes. And that would give you some leniency, even in the strictest case. And the other side says it's permitted, but we're going to restrict it because it's taking a life in any case. And you end up with this kind of anguish, okay? This kind of middle position. So then I gave you two contemporary decisors of Isaac Klein and David Bleich, who are conservative and orthodox respectively. And then I gave you on the last page, I wanted some women's voices here, but there are no women rabbis who have written tshuvot on this. So what I gave you, this is from an article that was just recently circulated again. It's the article, it was from last year's Forward, from Aviva Goldschmidt, who talks about Orthodox women who need abortions and what happens when they do. And then this is a really interesting thing at the bottom. This is a Reform rabbi and her congregant created a prayer for an abortion. If a woman determines she's going to get an abortion, there's no ritual for this. So they wrote a beautiful prayer, and here is a sort of précis about the prayer that they wrote. Let me take a moment. There's lots of questions that people want to ask. Did everybody get all of this? Take care. Oscar, we'll see you later. Go read well. Tell them I'll be there in about an hour or two. I know. Tell them I'm coming, I promise you. All right, just want to make sure it's clear, and any questions people have. Ronnie has a question over here, and then Jeff has a question in the back. Wait, hang on. Yeah?
Suppose it's a breech delivery.
Yeah.
And the definition is you have to have the head out. Now, very often what happens after a body comes out,
yeah,
the uterus clamps down on the head.
Yeah.
Makes it very hard to get out.
Yeah. See, these are things that doctors know that I don't, right? The question is, suppose it's a breech birth and the kid comes out, but the uterus clamps down on the head of the child, right? So if the majority of the kid is emerged, and you'd have to figure out what the majority means, up to the pupik, I suspect. Then you have to go through with the birth, even if it destroys the mother, because now today you would do C-section, but today you would know a lot of this stuff because you have fetal monitors and ultrasound and lots of tools that they didn't have. They didn't have these tools. I mean, I remember I was one of those dads who got to be in the delivery room when my kids were born, and watching both the miracle of the birth, the skill of the doctors and nurses, and all of these amazing tools they had to protect my wife and my kids. And I made a bracha. I mean, I cried watching these two guys. It was her obstetrician and a resident, an OB-GYN resident, caring for my wife. And the skill and the care and the nurses, I mean, it was just amazing. And all of these wonderful things, I mean, these are things that have changed the texture of our lives. I think I told you, I'm a cancer survivor. I wanted to know who invented the CAT scan machine because it saved my life twice. So it turns out it's two guys from Lucent Technologies in New Jersey. They were trying to create military radar, and they screwed up. So I wrote them a letter. I said, it has to be God's hand that turned a weapon of death into a tool of life. And I want to tell you that you saved my life, and I made up a bracha for you guys. There's a bracha at the beginning of the morning. We say, Baruch Pokeach Ivrim. Blessed is God who opens the eyes of the blind. Because in old days, they would have had to have done an exploratory surgery to find out what I had. My surgeon knew exactly what he was going in to look for. And I said, I want to thank you guys, saved my life twice. Right? And I got a really nice letter back from the corporate head of Lucent Technologies offering me stock, you know, so. So.
Did you buy it?
I should have. Yeah, I should. But medicine makes me teary-eyed because, you know, I'm the product of medicine. I mean, I'm alive because of smart doctors and nurses and technicians. So watching, they didn't have this stuff, Ronnie. This is, you know, a midwife and her assistant and a bucket of water and some schmantas. Now, birth the kid. You know, it's a miracle that anybody got birth, right? Yes. All right, who's up?
Rabbi,
Yes.
I remember learning in Chumash that you only have a funeral for a baby that survives a Brit Milah.
Yeah, that's a whole different. No, it's later. It's the 30 days or 3 months. There's a whole, Jeff in the back. There's a whole interesting tradition about what do you do for a fetus. Okay, the tradition, the halacha is that a baby has to live 3 months before it's fully considered a member of the community. And if a baby dies before the 3 months, you don't have a funeral, you don't have shiva. Now, that sounds really cruel. And the reason is, because remember that, again, pre-modern medicine, lots and lots and lots of kids died in childbirth or died in their first 3 months. And you couldn't mobilize the whole community for shiva and everything every time that happened. So what you did was you backed it off a little bit. Now today that's different. So I've done many services. I've done services for people, for women who miscarried in late-term pregnancies, because as far as that family was concerned, that was their child. They bought the crib. They were picking out names. They had, so I did a whole funeral for that child. I know that's against halacha, but I felt the family needed it more than halacha needed me not to do it. So I've done it.
But in terms of going backwards, in terms of defining
Yeah.
does that have any bearing on?
Not here. No, that's different. That's different. Now, the baby is a baby once it's halfway out. It's just that you do different rites for you do a brit milah, though. If a baby is stillborn or born, you do a brit milah. Yes, you do a brit milah. You don't bury an uncircumcised child, right? So you do a brit milah even on the body of a baby, and no. It's actually considered a tremendous. It's considered a tremendous chesed. A tremendous.
You hold the baby for 8 days?
What? No. You do it right away. You do it right away. But it's a tremendous chesed. You want to bury this child as a Jew. Jeffrey.
So I didn't have a chance yet to read the last two entries on your papers, but I'm interested, does the debate or the female voice, does the debate break differently from the female voice? Is it equally contentious, or does it tend to come down more in favor of leniency, or are there different arguments that rise to the surface from the female voice?
I can't tell you the answer to the question. Is does the debate break differently in the female voice? We don't have yet a body of halachic writing from female rabbis, from female scholars. We will soon. There are female scholars now. There are female rabbis. We've had a generation of Reform female rabbis, and we've had a generation of conservative, and we are in the middle of the first generation of Orthodox female rabbis, and there are scholars of halacha, right? Deborah is the head of the rabbinical school at HUC. I mean, there are people that are real scholars, and we will soon have that halacha. I went looking for it. I didn't find it.
Okay, so what does Nina say?
That's... She said, you're talking about that? No. What I wanted to do is I wanted to bring at least something. And what you find, this article made me cry. I mean, because what she talks about is, the anguish of an Orthodox woman who knows the tradition and knows how precious children are and knows, but also knows, and she brings, what the article is, it gives you her this is her commentary, and then there's about 10 testimonials, like the one I gave you here, where a woman said, I needed to do this. And it's really interesting the way the rabbis responded. Her rabbi said, do it. Followed Waldenberg. Other rabbis were not as... Other rabbis... What's really interesting are the ones she brings with her. Says, I went to my rabbi, I asked him, he refused to give me an answer. Or he told me to do what I wanted to do. Which means the rabbi is split, and he's split between what he knows his tradition tells him to do and the woman sitting in front of him. It's a contest between his head and his heart, which is quite remarkable, just remarkable. So you will see in the next generation a halacha written by women, and we'll see how it sounds. I thought that the most beautiful line was the last paragraph of the testimony on the first page, where she says, this is the woman who had the abortion, 35-year-old Orthodox woman. To anyone who hasn't been there, abortion is a theoretical issue. And no one ever thinks they'll have to deal with it on a personal level. Until you do, it's all well and good to have your opinions about abortion, but you really don't know what you're talking about until you're in the situation. And then she adds, because she's a very sensitive Orthodox Jew, halacha is compassionate, we should be too. Which is a really interesting reading of these sources, right? A really interesting reading. Yes, Ram, and then.
What role does the mother have in the decision? For example, a woman is pregnant,
Yeah.
and they say, if this pregnancy, if you continue the pregnancy,
Yeah.
the child will live and you will die.
Yeah.
And she says, that's okay. Kill me, save the baby.
I don't know that, I don't know. I mean, I don't know that there is, I haven't seen that case, so I couldn't tell you what the rabbis would say. Let Mark have the next one. What the rabbis would say under those circumstances. My suspicion would be that if they had the power to do so, they would do the abortion. But in American law, I don't think you're allowed to do that. I don't think, unless you establish conservatorship, which is a very complicated legal procedure. But in Jewish law, if you ask that question, I don't know exactly what Jewish law would say. I suspect the rabbis would tell her to have the abortion, but I don't know if they could force her to do it. That's a very interesting case. It's a very interesting case. All right, Rabbi. Rabbi Gelman, by the way, has written extensively on this issue, and I appreciate your listening.
Thank you. I think your summary was wonderful, and I think my experience with Moshe Feinstein's son-in-law was he was the chairman of the most important Jewish medical ethics committee in America, the Jewish Medical Ethics Committee of the Federation in New York. And when he stepped down, he appointed me as his successor.
Yeah.
And we got many requests from hospitals. We published a compendium of Jewish medical ethics that says 500,000 copies in hospitals all over the world, which explains for Orthodox patients and observant patients and patients who want to consult with the wisdom of Jewish legal traditions, these are our conclusions about what you should do.
Mm-hmm.
And we authorized, Moshe Tendler authorized, when he was chairman, abortions for the pregnancy of schizophrenic women. We authorized abortions, the case where a woman had cancer, cervical cancer, and in order to take the cancer drugs, it would kill the fetus. Mm-hmm. And we authorized her to take the drugs, and because it would have a salutary effect on saving her life. My dissertation in philosophy is on, my secular dissertation is on the ethics of abortion. Mm-hmm. So there's nothing written that I haven't read in Jewish or secular texts. So let me start with a simple point, and that is the distinction you make is critical in a very, very narrow framework. Mm-hmm. It's a critical distinction because what you're trying to identify is what if there are three kinds, but there's two kinds of abortions essentially, therapeutic and elective. A therapeutic abortion is an abortion that, for however defined, it's done for a reason other than terminating the pregnancy.
Yeah.
An elective abortion is an abortion done because the woman does not want to be pregnant, even though she faces no discernible health, mental or physical health threats.
Yeah.
The debate over abortion in America is by and large in a 95 to 5% ratio a debate over elective abortion. It is not a debate over therapeutic abortion in general. That is, women presenting for an abortion have what they consider to be, and what is, a legal right to say, look, I'm pregnant, I no longer wish to be pregnant, and I want the assistance of this clinic in terminating my pregnancy.
Right.
There is not one single rabbinic authority who has ever written on abortion, and that includes the most left-wing reform rabbis. Not one who has authorized abortion on demand. Now, that is the dominant Jewish position.
Right.
And the dominant, it's whether it's the dominant position in America depends on which survey you look
So
at.
that's why I just want to just comment on what you said. So the point then is that if you're looking at Jewish tradition, however it's interpreted in many different forms, it doesn't fit in either extreme. It's somewhere, if you're going to think of a spectrum, which is a bad way to think about it, but somewhere between, right of choice and right to life. As from an ethical point, not legislative, but in terms of, is it the right thing to do? Right? So you have not legislating, we're not passing laws, but just in terms of the right thing to do. Jewish law has that kind of reverence for life under all circumstances.
Right. The second point I would make is the halachic one, which is that the fetus is described in the Talmud as ubar yerech imo. The fetus ubar is an appendage of the mother. It's considered a safek nefesh, a doubtful life. But in that, it has exactly the same status as a goses. A dying person is in exactly the same status as a fetus, which means someone's within 3 days of death, and you move them or jostle them,
Right.
and they die, you're guilty of
Something.
something,
Right, yeah.
just like you're guilty of something with a fetus.
Right.
So the notion that something isn't a complete person is then used by people who have political and not philosophical agendas, and to say, well, if it's not a real person, how in the world could the rights of a non-person trump the right of a person?
Right.
The answer to that is critical for Jews to understand.
Yeah.
The first is that any argument that begins with a woman has a right to her body is not a Jewish argument, any more than a man has a right to his body. The Jewish arguments must be, if they are authentically Jewish, all premised on the understanding of the teaching of Jewish law, which is univocal, completely uniform throughout all history, that God owns our bodies, and that we live in a system of duties in which we have obligations to our own bodies, to other bodies,
Right.
not to kill them, not to abuse them.
Yeah.
So the question then is, how does, which was fascinating to me, and should put a point on this pro-life business, and did for me personally, and that is, you have a tradition which doesn't believe the fetus is a person. That's absolutely right. Even Maimonides, in his support of Radifa, doesn't ever go so far as to say the rodef, the fetus is a rodef. He actually says kerodef. Kerodef. It's like a rodef.
Okay, all right. Finish the point.
So, but the point is he knows enough to know that he can't make that strong judgment.
Yeah.
So the point is, how do they get there?
All right, let's finish, Mark. Come on.
Yeah. So here's how they get there, which isn't in the text. In NIDA 44b, says it's a law for Gentiles, and the laws of the B'nai Noach, that you shouldn't murder.
Right.
Well, where's the text? It says, "Hashafet dam adam ba'adam damo yishafet."
Yeah.
One who sheds blood, by man shall his blood be shed.
Yeah.
So then they ask, well, what is a adam ba'adam? What is a man within a man?
Right.
That's a fetus. So then they say, well, here we have an Isur, here we have a prohibition against abortion for non-Jews. And then they say, how is it possible that abortion could clearly be prohibited for non-Jews and permitted to Jews.
Yeah.
The answer from the entire Jewish tradition is that abortion, elective abortion, the vast majority of abortions at stake in our political debate, that's just ripping our culture apart, is a debate about elective abortions over which Jewish law has no dissent.
Okay. Let's finish with just two opinions at the bottom here. So I want to show you Isaac Klein and David Bleich, okay? And you'll hear some of what Rabbi Gelman just offered us. So Isaac Klein was a rabbi in Buffalo, New York. He was he wrote a very important compendium of Jewish law that's used by conservative rabbis to sort of gather up all of our opinion. And you'll see what he does here. This is a Jew, and you'll hear Rabbi Gelman's point in this, right? And you'll hear all the previous opinions here. You'll see what he does. A very clever way of doing this. He says there's a distinction between early and late pregnancy. In later stages, we permit abortion only when the birth of the fetus would direct threat to the life of the mother. The threat should be interpreted to include cases of teenage pregnancy would have such debilitating mother as to constitute a hazard to her life, however remote the danger may be. In early stages, we allow therapeutic abortions, right, to help the mother, right, wherever there is a threat to the health of the mother, direct or indirect, physically or psychologically. Since such an interpretation is very flexible and therefore subject to abuse, the facts have to be established. We would permit abortion in cases of thalidomide babies, rape, life, not because the fetus has no right to life, but because it constitutes a threat to the health of the mother. There's an arena of controversy. Many authorities disagree. But he says, finally, as Rabbi Gelman pointed out, we would not permit abortions that are prompted merely by a desire of the mother not to have another child. So he would say Jewish law allows for therapeutic abortions, particularly in the early stage of pregnancy, under fairly broad opinions, and then it gets more restricted the farther pregnancy goes. But it's always going to be something that must be taken with a great deal of reverence for the sanctity of life. David Bleich is an Orthodox authority who writes a lot on medical ethics, and he quotes Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, who we read. But he knows that it sounds harsh. He knows that it sounds harsh. I'm interested that Tendler disagreed with his father-in-law. So here's what he writes. He's a leading Orthodox scholar of our time. Moshe Feinstein forbids an abortion unless, in the opinion of a physician, it's nearly certain that otherwise the mother will die. In light of what may at times appear to be a harsh and forbidding stance, one might be tempted to conclude that Jewish law manifests an indifferent attitude to the individual and his plight. Now, I put the SIC there because it's not his plight, it's her plight, right? It is important that we recognize that quite to the contrary, halacha is motivated first and foremost by a concern and solicitude for all living creatures. It is this extreme concern for, again, man's inalienable right to life, both actual and potential, which permeates these many halachic determinations. A Jew is governed by such reverence for life that he trembles, he keeps using this language, that he trembles lest he tamper unmindfully with the greatest of all divine gifts, the bestowal and withholding of what is a prerogative of God alone. Although he may be master over all within the world, there remains areas where man must fear to tread, acknowledging the limits of his sovereignty and the limitations of his understanding. In the unborn child lies the mystery and enigma of existence. Confronted by the miracle of life itself, man can only draw back in silence before the wonder of the Lord. Very poetic for a halachic guy who's a very, very powerful scholar of halacha. That's a very poetic answer, don't you think? And so I want you to see where this fits. You see where this fits? It doesn't fit in the American debate of right to life, right to choose. It doesn't permit a sign-waving slogan. It demands a great deal of seriousness, a great deal of nuance, and a great deal of reverence on both sides, And that, I think, is what Jewish law would contribute to the conversation. I think next week we'll come back to the Torah, okay? Right? So join us in the other room to celebrate veterans. Thanks for being with us this morning. Thank you. That was great. I didn't mean to cut you off, but thank you.
Rabbi, I'm from San Diego.
Welcome. We're glad to have you with us.
I came for sad reasons. My daughter just lost a baby inside
Oh, gosh,
of
I'm
her.
so sorry. I'm
Is there
so
a time
sorry.
where you're bringing people up for a group aliyah?
We don't do group aliyot today, but we do it other times. But
Can I ask a question? It
but-
wasn't me, so
I'm so,
it's
your
her
sister,
yeah.
I'm so sorry.